Hello, my name is Karen Ostrowski, and I am an adjunct English professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Today, I'm going to talk about a recent experience I had bringing educational stakeholders into my online classroom. I invited 3 different people. One is an educational administrator, one is an educator, and one is an adult student who has experience taking online courses. I selected these individuals because I know them all professionally and I trust their opinions and the fact that they are willing to provide me with honest feedback. So after I invited them all into my classroom and we went through various parts of observing things and asking questions, I sat down with each of them individually and received some feedback. So some of the specific takeaways I received were, 1, the importance of using class announcements strategically to provide clarity and to enhance student engagement. A second takeaway were suggestions for ways to provide meaningful feedback in the online environment. So I have requirements to engage students in the online discussion posts and answer their responses. I also have to use grading rubrics and I have to provide comments in the gradebook. And those are 3 separate requirements for every assignment and discussion. So this can be very repetitive, and the stakeholders and I discussed ways to make this process more meaningful and less overwhelming for me. And then the third takeaway were some ideas about finding external resources and bringing those either into the weekly announcements or responses to student posts. Now, the collaboration with my stakeholders was actually pretty fantastic. So all 3 of the walkthroughs were conducted using screen sharing. So I contacted each person, and then at the prearranged time, I entered into a Microsoft Teams call with each one separately. And then once the call was started, I activated the screen sharing. So since I teach online, I designed the walkthroughs so each stakeholder could take control of my screen and they could navigate through any part of my classroom that they wanted to. So we combined an observation and a question period since my classroom setup doesn't have active students, engaged all the time. So that meant that my observers could be in there and they could talk to me without students being in there and watching the same thing. So they asked questions and I was able to answer those questions as we navigated through each part. So it was a very positive collaborative experience because there was such good engagement between us while they were in the classroom. So the feedback that surprised me the most was from my friend that is currently an ACE doctoral student like me. So she expressed surprise at the amount of work that is in that classroom that I teach. So this is an undergraduate classroom that we were in, and she was really surprised by the amount of work my students need to complete weekly and also the amount of work for me as the teacher, so like the grading requirements and the posting requirements. So I did point out to her that my students do not have to read as much academic material as we do in the ACE program, so that's kind of a lesser degree of a requirement. And they also do not have to insert academic journal citations into the discussion posts. But even after we pointed that out, that was what surprised me the most, was her kind of shock at how much work it really is for those undergraduate students. So how did I take this information that I was given and how have I started to incorporate that feedback? So first, I have already started designing updated announcements to incorporate into my future weeks of my course that will incorporate the feedback from those stakeholders. So they gave me those ideas about how to further engage students and pull in those outside resources. So I'm already working on updating my future course announcements to make them more meaningful. And I also took the feedback about how to kind of organize grading and to minimize some of the workload. So I'm kind of working on a system to track the feedback that I'm providing and kind of make myself a repository of certain comments that I do consistently have to create and recreate with each student. So this might remove some of that burden. So thank you for listening to this podcast where I gave you some information about my recent experience with stakeholders coming into my classroom and giving me some professional feedback.